And this renewed focus on science and technology, Mr. Eskelund, will have international implications, of course. How will that policy or that endeavor reshape China's relationship with the rest of the world, for example, with Europe? Will the relationship becoming more complementary or competitive in this regard?
I think it's both a great opportunity, but it's also a big challenge. Of course, China is today indispensable for Europe in its quest to reduce its impact on the climate. And China is a leader within EV, within batteries, within wind and solar and so on. But we also see that within many of these areas, whether it's EV, whether it's batteries, whether it's solar or wind, there is already today massive overcapacity. And that means if there are continued investment into these areas, some companies will go out of business simply because the demand is not there. Or the prices will become so depressed that everyone will lose out. So it'll be very important going forward, and also in regards to the relationship with Europe, that a balance is being found. So they're not, over-investment in these areas, which eventually is going to hurt everyone. And in that regard, it was pleasing also to hear that overcapacity is something that the leaders are also concerned about. And I think making sure you get the balance between supply and demand exactly right will be key to also maintain a good relationship. And let's not forget, the relationship between Europe and China has created so much value for both China and for Europe. We believe that there's significant potential also going forward. And that's the reason that it's so important that we begin to look at those issues that are today creating tension. Here, and not least, getting the balance between supply and demand right.
Tell us a little bit more about the potential side. What sectors, as a European representative here, do you see in bilateral terms?
I think you mentioned the areas before related to these new technologies, certainly anything related to decarbonization. But we need also to make sure that there's a balance. And we saw how in the past few years that the trade imbalance has grown very, very large and probably not sustainable. So we need to look at, how can we bring a little bit balance back in the relationship? But the potential is there, definitely.
So is Europe willing to export more value-added, high-tech products to China?
I think Europe is exporting as much as it can, even amongst the high-tech products. I think a company like ASML, they had the highest export last year to China ever. But I think when you look at it from an absolute perspective, and I'm in container shipping, we can see that actually if you compare to 5 years ago, European exports to China has declined, whereas Chinese exports to China has grown very considerable. Part of the reason is that European companies today do not have access to public procurement. And that's where we hope to see, and have already seen this year.
Indeed. We'll be talking more about that.
I just want to follow up what you said about the around 5% growth, because I think it's a quite ambitious target. But I think to us, actually, in the business, it's not so important that you have a high GDP number. What is more important is the composition of the GDP, and where we hope to see growth in particular is within domestic demand, within consumption. Because if you have growth in consumption, then you will also see the need for jobs arising. And that will take care of a lot of the issues we see with employment right now, and also take care of the overcapacity. And again, we saw at Lianghui, at the NPC also, that domestic demand was mentioned as a concern. And what we are hoping now is, of course, to see after the NPC that there will be concrete initiatives that will help to boost domestic demand and consumption.
Well, China's economy picked up on the whole, gentlemen, last year, but then some of the traditional areas of growth are experiencing bottleneck problems, difficulties or headwinds, we should say. How do you look at the new drivers of growth? Mr. Eskelund.
Clearly there is a potential, but I think, again, what would surprise me a little bit is if regulators and authorities had not been seeing this earlier, because these are not entirely new areas. I think there's a great potential, but I think you also need to look at other factors. For example, as we talked about consumption and domestic demand, because ultimately that will be what will fund these in the longer term. You can allocate resources towards it now, but if you don't work on the underlying demand, then you will not have this sustained long-term demand. But again, we think it's right. I mean, the Chinese economy is transitioning, and that's one of the reasons that we also like to be here as foreign companies. My predecessor as president of the Chamber said that we regard China as a fitness center for foreign companies, and that is Exactly, because we're being challenged on bringing our best technologies. There's very good competition here, so we really need to be on our toes, and that's a good thing. What is, of course, is essential is that when you go in and you have these pro-development policies, that it's policies that sort of support the development of new technologies, but do not create distortions in the market. Then I think it's effective if you can engineer it in such a way.
And one policy direction is to further open up the market, to provide more favorable conditions to invite more foreign investment to the country. What are some of the items that topping your concern list?
First of all, we very much welcome this focus, and we saw a few months ago the Ministry of Commerce actually issuing a letter that foreign companies should be given national treatment. That is very, very positive. That is something that we have been talking about for a long time. I think another thing is, because the whole world now is talking about security, is how do you get the balance right between security concerns and open markets? We have seen, for example, the proposed new data security laws, which will be problematic for many companies. So it's important we have a discussion about how can you protect national security while at the same time also allowing companies to develop to their full potential. So get that balance right, I think, would be very, very important for both foreign and domestic companies.
In recent years, China has stopped all coal-fired power plant overseas and has been emphasizing this green focus in BRI projects. What do you make of this effort?
No, but we think that's absolutely a positive, that there'll be no more coal-powered power plants in Belt and Road. It's one of these things that we need to see, and we hope that that is also being expanded domestically in China, because China is, and that's actually a positive. China is at the same time the undisputed leader within green technology, whether it's battery, solar, wind, you name it, but at the same time also by far the world's largest CO2 emitter. But that actually fits very well together, because you need that capacity to generate green power in order to really reduce the CO2 emissions. So that's actually a positive. And of course, it's a positive for the world also. China will be a crucial enabler for the world to get close to the ambitious climate targets that have been set. And I think the world would be worse off if we are not making use of that potential that Chinese technology has to help us bring down emissions.
And China has also raised this very ambitious carbon peaking and, of course, carbon neutrality targets, and putting that into the all-green context, green development of China. What kind of opportunities that will create for foreign businesses?
I think you're seeing sort of the evolution of an entirely new ecosystems, and I think the challenge for foreign business is that, you know, how can we come to play a role of that? How can we take part of that? And that's where we hope, of course, that sort of China's integration with the rest of the world will continue to be at this high level, and that we will find ways and will be allowed to participate in some of these things. I think one of the key advantages that China has had is that it's such a fantastically large market. And you know, if you take an airplane from Beijing to Gansu province, you will see thousands of kilometers basically paved with solar panels and windmills and so on. It has been difficult for foreign companies to participate that, either because they have not been able to participate in public procurement or for cost reasons or others. And that's where I think the world could gain from participation, by allowing each other to participate in each other's markets. And I think really this is something we owe to future generations.